Cheryl, thank you. So first of all, I just want to apologize. I'm getting over a cold, so if I cough or whatever, please forgive me. First of all, I recognize some of you, and it's really nice to see you again. I think it's been, 3 years or 4 years since I was there, but I really appreciate everybody showing up. And I just would like to thank Cheryl for hosting this. And I would like to share my screen and talk to you about The House is in the Book. So I think that many of you understand how devastating COVID has been to people in the arts. I think for writers, it was a problem, but it wasn't debilitating because people continued to read. And for some writers, it was actually a very productive time. I think for dancers and actors, it was impossible, horrible, actually. I think for musicians, it was also not good. I think for artists, it wasn't good, but it wasn't impossible because we had a lot of virtual exhibitions. And that really eased some of the angst of dealing with COVID. So in 2019, there was an additional Jerusalem Biennale. I think this was the fourth one that we had. And there were two major exhibitions, one that I curated and one that I was a solo show, and they were big productions. And when that was over, I had this deep desire to do something much quieter, much more feminine, and much more intimate. And I had this idea that I would do an exhibition with two other artists who did books and were printmakers about artist books. And right about that time, I guess maybe a few months into having this idea, I spoke to two other artists that I adore and a curator. So these are all totally amazing women, and I would like to introduce them to you. So the top right is Emily Bilsky. She's a curator, and I will tell you a little bit more about her. I'm going to be quoting at length from her essay. She's a fantastic writer, and she's won lots of awards for her writing. Obviously, I'm on the bottom right. On the bottom left is Mirta Kupferminc. She's a printmaker and a bookmaker and an artist from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And the top left is Lynne Avadenka, also a bookmaker, artist, printmaker from Detroit. So this was the team that I really wanted to work with. And we had to sort of navigate doing this on 3 different continents, on 3 different time zones. So let me tell you about Mirta. I met Mirta in the 2017 Biennale, and we stayed in touch. We had no idea where this friendship was going to go, but we knew we wanted to do something together. Mirta is an award-winning artist and teacher. She was born in Buenos Aires to immigrant parents who survived Auschwitz. Exile and migration, identity, human rights, and memory are the themes that run throughout her work. Since 1977, she has had over 100 solo exhibitions, including representing Argentina in international biennales. Her works are in numerous collections, among them the Golda Meir Library, the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C., the Israel Museum, the Fine Arts Taipei Museum in Taiwan, and the Shanghai National Museum in China. So you see, Mirta's super accomplished. And I wanted to give you a sense of her beautiful artist books. She works in various formats. She works with very different materials. Her etchings are magnificent. Her blacks are velvety in her etchings. She's very, very accomplished printmaker. And some of what you're seeing were actually in the exhibition that we created. Lynn, I met, actually, funny enough, Lynn, I ordered 2 of her artist books probably 30 years ago when we lived in Atlanta. I didn't know her. I just knew I loved her books. Then in about 2015, She came as one of the fellows of the American Academy in Jerusalem, and her project was at the Jerusalem Print Workshop, where I do my etchings every Wednesday, and we got to talking and to know each other. I then asked her to come to Venice with me in 2018, when I led a group of 5 international artists to do a climate change project through Bet Venezia. And I actually, the last time I was with you guys, I gave a lecture about this. So that's where I knew Lynn from, and I knew she would be perfect. Lynn's works are very different than Mirta's. They are very much focused on typography. She has a deep love for type, and her typography is always elegant and beautiful. Her works are very graphic and geometrical. This is one of her Japanese screen formats. And these are some other books that she's done, and all of these books were in the exhibition that we curated. So me, you know, and when I was there, I gave an artist talk about my artist books. So you all have seen many of these, but this is just a sample of some of my artist books, and some of these are new. So you can see that the 3 of us created a broad range of artist books. So I knew that we could do something together. Now, Emily Bilsky is an expert of 19th and 20th century art and cultural history, contemporary art, and art and Jewish culture. Bilsky is published on modernism and on the interface between art, cultural history, Jewish experience, and on contemporary art. She served as a curator and consultant to museums in the United States, Europe, and Israel. A graduate of Harvard University, she's the winner of 2 National Jewish Book Awards. And I realized that I skipped telling you something about Lynn. Lynne Avadenka is an American artist and printmaker known for her works that explore text and image, the physical and philosophical idea of the book, and the mystery and the beauty of visual language. Her works can be found in numerous international collections, including the Library of Congress, the Watson Library of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Detroit Institute of Arts, the British Library, and the Israel Museum. Among her awards are individual artist fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the Kresge Arts in Detroit. So you see that between all of us, I feel like we assembled a formidable team. So we began by having these multitude meetings on Zoom, trying to figure out, working long distance, what we were going to do. At the same time, the Biennale announced the theme for the 2021 Biennale, which was Arba Amot, which means 4 cubits. It's a concept in Judaism for distancing, for personal interactions. It even involves the Eruv. And of course, this became super loaded during COVID, because under normal circumstances, Arba Amot is like a Talmudic expression. It's a concept. But when you applied this and added this to the layer of COVID, it became supercharged. So we met almost every week or every other week for the first 9 months, I think, that we were working. And one of the things that we decided that we would do is work with poetry. And we came across, I can't remember which one of us suggested, this beautiful poem by Edmund Jabez, At the Threshold of the Book. And this is just a tiny sample of the bigger poem. You are a Jew and you talk like one, but I am cold. It is dark. Let me come into the house. There is a lamp on my table and the house is in the book. So I will live in the house after all. So this became kind of the springboard from which we began to work, because this poem seemed to speak to us on many, many levels. So then we began to brainstorm. What was the book going to look like? What was the interaction between each of these artists? Now, the poem, this Edmund Jabez, the Egyptian-born French-Jewish philosopher, he wrote obsessively about the book. And this phase, the houses in the book, conveys how much lived experience was confined within the 4 walls of our homes. And at the same time, common global experiences and virtual communication opened up new vistas of connection, which is exactly what we artists were experiencing. Reconceived notions of private, civic, and global space really became the heart of our book. And it was all inspired by Arba Amot, 4 cubits, the Jewish concept of personal space. So we began playing with the format, and we decided what we needed to do in order to make all of our pages hang together was to create a shared archive. So each of us contributed multiple images that we found. Some of these came from old encyclopedias. Some of these were things that we had gathered up in our own personal archives. And we created this shared archive that each of us could manipulate in whatever way we wanted to. So this really forged our collaborative process. And we had many, many conversations. We needed to decide on a format, on the dimensions of the book, on paper, and on printing. And this became even more difficult because we were separated by cities and countries. We did not actually have the exact same papers available to us in Israel and in Detroit and in Buenos Aires. We had similar weight papers and they were similar whites, but they weren't the exact same paper. So we had lots and lots of challenges that we needed to overcome. We also were using different printers, and we needed to make sure that everything was going to hold together when the whole book finished. So you can see here, this is lots of playing with what we could do and what would happen and what it would look like. This is Lynn actually working with her printer, color correcting her final pages. So now what I'd like to do is show you Mirta's. I like to show you all of our final pages, but I'm going to start with Mirta's. Okay. So Mirta, we each did 4 double page spreads. Mirta's folios, as Emily wrote, space itself seems to simultaneously contract and expand, and the accordion-like rendering of a domestic interior constructed from Hebrew texts in Mirta's pages gives visual expression to these shifting perceptions. So Mirta's work is a combination of drawing and found images. And you can see where she has taken elements from the archive that we shared together, but completely manipulated them. These are my folios, and I worked in a completely different way. One of my biggest concerns was the virus that we couldn't see, and these germs that were in the air, and social distancing. And of course, Arba Amot, this theme of 4 cubits, the measurement is actually the measurement from the wrist to the elbow, which is why those bones are there. That's where this measurement comes from. And if you remember, I'll just switch back for a minute. And I want to show you in the archive. So the top left is a page from a German encyclopedia. And I took that image of the 2 women. And that's what I used here. Okay, so you can see how we were inspired and how we manipulated our archive in the ways that we needed. So that little house actually is printed with text from the tractate about the Eruv in the Talmud, which is also about distances, boundaries, where you can go, where you can't go. And this became supercharged, for example, when we were under lockdown and we were only allowed to go 50 meters from our houses. So this over and over again, this sense of separation, of isolation, this reappears over and over again in our pages. And I tend to manipulate the 2-dimensional form. So there's books inside of my books, like this little black and white book that's hand tied on the left-hand side. That's a book that's glued to my book. And these little sukkahs, actually the viewer can assemble as he goes through the book, but these are meant to be small, isolated dwellings. And finally, My pages, I dealt with the Eruv and boundaries, which again became very important during the lockdowns of COVID. Now, these are Lynn's pages. And Lynn works very differently than Mirta or I, and she very much dealt with the concept of 40. The word quarantine is derived from 40, the number of days sailors arriving in the port of Venice were required to remain shipboard to prevent the spreading of disease. And in all of her folios, Lynn refers to this etymology and she riffs on additional numeric associations. 4 is the number of matriarchs, 4 is the number of directions, 4 is the phases of the moon. And during the pandemic, this waxing and waning moon served as a kind of touchstone for all of us, as Emily writes, as our awareness of time was altered by disrupted daily routines and each day seemed to bleed into the next. So her structures are at once confining and yet they're open to the outside world as they float across the pages. So these are Lynn's 4 pages. So now you've seen what we each did alone in our studios. So concurrently, we applied to the Anolic Family Awards. This is an amazing foundation that gives awards to Jewish artists, emerging Jewish artists, and they specifically have a book award. And we applied for it and we won it. And so that gave us like a real much needed boost that we were doing the right thing and that the project had merit. So the next thing we needed to worry about was where we were going to have this show. So the Jerusalem Print Workshop really seemed like the perfect fit, but they tend not to sponsor festivals. Like they don't usually, they hang their own shows. They don't usually need to invite other festivals to show their work there. But I've been going there for 22 years and I asked the director, Ari Kalemnik, could we please hang this show in their space, as so many of our books dealt with printmaking and etching that we were all printmakers. And in fact, the upper gallery in this space is so gorgeous. So these pictures are actually not from our exhibit. They're from a book exhibit that the Print Workshop put on about 15 years ago. But we knew that it was possible. We knew that we could do a beautiful book show in this space. So Arik gave me the blueprint and we were off. So just to give you kind of the insider's view of what goes into an exhibition, we had to go down in the basement. We had to measure all the lucite boxes and figure out what would fit. We had to look at how many tables they had. And then we had to start laying this thing out. And of course, all of this is happening without the books. All of Mirta's books were in her studio in Buenos Aires. All of Lynn's books were in her studio in Detroit. And my books were here. How were we going to get all this work to Jerusalem? So this got really, really tricky because we thought originally that Mirta and Lynn would come and bring their work and help us hang the show and be there for the opening. But in fact, what happened is that Israel went into another lockdown and they were not allowed in the country. And in fact, 2 weeks before the exhibition opened, I petitioned, no, it was after the exhibition opened, but I wanted them to come for the closing. I worked with the mayor's office. I think I spent 4 solid days getting letters written from the mayor's office saying that their presence was required, sending everything to the Ministry of Health. In the end, both of their applications were rejected. But in the meantime, somehow we had to get all their books and their pages that they had done to Jerusalem. So we paid Israelis going to Argentina and coming from New York to bring 2 massive suitcases full of their books to Jerusalem. So this is a picture of what arrived. Now, the other piece of this that you haven't yet seen is the boxes that we had made to hold these books and the video that we decided to do. So now we're going to get into world currencies and the impact of COVID on economies. So the Argentinian peso is basically in the toilet. So any work you do in Argentina now is dirt cheap. So the stack of boxes that you see on the right in my studio, if we had had these cloth covered handmade boxes made in America or Israel, they probably would have been $200 each. but in Argentina, they were $25 each. So we decided, you know what, we're going to have them made there, and we're going to figure out how to get them to Jerusalem, which is exactly what we did. The other thing is that we decided that we would make a video. Now, Lynn and I had never made a video before in our lives. Mirta had made several, and she had an animator, a stop action animator, a brilliant woman named Mariana Sosnowski, and a composer, Ernesto Romero, that she wanted to work with. And I'm going to show you the video later on. But this is just to get you an idea of all the logistics that it went into behind the scenes. So Lynn, who is an amazing letterpress artist, printed the colophon, the artist essay, the title page in her studio in Detroit. And we had to FedEx those to Israel. Some of them I went to America to visit family over the summer. I brought back some of those, but it really was kind of a logistic nightmare. And this was all because of COVID, like how to get things finally to Jerusalem that we needed. So here we are finally in the Jerusalem Print Workshop, getting ready to install the exhibition. Now the works on the walls are from the previous exhibition. Those things all come down. But here you can see all the books from Argentina and Detroit and Jerusalem all unpacked. We knew that we had requested way too many books for the space, but we wanted, Emily especially, wanted to curate. You know, we didn't know how Mirta's work would look next to Lynn's, how Lynn's work would look next to mine. We needed to physically see these books in reality in order to curate the show. So everything got unpacked, everything got unwrapped. I can't even tell you how nervous I was driving these books downtown to Jerusalem. One of Mirta's books is $15,000. You know, one of Lynn's books is $4,000. I think I had like, I don't know, $35,000 or $40,000 worth of books in the back of my car. So here we are with all these beautiful books spread out, trying to figure out what is going to go where. This particular picture is Mirta's Borges book, and this is a $15,000 book full of the most gorgeous etchings. And you can see we've laid out paper, we've carefully covered things, and now the exhibition starts to go up. And this is I think this is my favorite slide in the entire PowerPoint, because we had never seen our pages come together before. And I was really sad because Mirta and Lynn weren't there with Emily and I, but to see the book finally come together in unison on the wall at one time was thrilling. And it was almost 2 years in the making before we got to see this. And here it is on the wall. And this is really the way we had it envisioned, is that it would be one long accordion fold book with each section attached one to the other. And that TV screen at the end is where we showed our video. And this is just to give you an idea of the final show. So we had individual tables, and some of the more interactive books, or the books that were needed to be viewed from both sides, were on these tables. And the more valuable books, and the books that we really didn't want people to touch, were under the lucite cases. Here you see Emily. We finally settled on exactly how one of the tables is going to look. And then, of course, these got covered with glass. And we chose several pages from different books to hang on the wall. Here you see another case. This one actually got moved around. We moved things around for days. Here you see me handling one of Mirta's books. And Emily's taking a picture of something to show Lynn or Mirta. And this is really the way it looked just about at the end. This is Ari Kalemnik, believe it or not. He's the director of the print workshop. He's 87 years old. He still works every day at the print workshop. Here he is hanging one of Mirta's etchings on the wall, and we're cleaning the glass, getting ready to put it on the 2 vitrines. And finally, we come to the opening. So the opening reception, we really didn't know, I think, until a couple weeks before, whether this thing was going to happen and we were going to have people. a lot of wonderful things happened. James Snyder, the past director of the Israel Museum, happened to be there for the entire Biennale opening. You see Emily at the opening, and you see the flowers that Lynn and Mirta sent because they couldn't be there. And now I want to deal with the video that we had made. So you see in the bottom right, Mirta on the right, Ernesto in the middle, the composer, and Mariana, the animator. And that is Ernesto's studio. And what I would like to do now is show you the video that we created. But before I show it to you, I kind of want to give you the cliff notes before you look at it. So we designed the video to have 4 sections to play off of this idea for Amot. And there were many themes that we wanted the book, in the way that the book pages came alive, that we wanted people to feel certain feelings. So these are the things that I would request that you look at when you view this video. The concept of contracting and expanding, the sense of aloneness, fragmentation, distance, how our houses became solitary places, how the cities that we lived in became ghost towns. The idea of red cities and red countries and orange cities and green cities, of touching and not touching, of worlds collapsing onto themselves, of falling down and getting up again. But we really wanted the video to end on a positive note. So I also would hope that you would feel at the end of the video how we reinvented our world, how traveling perhaps became possible again, the idea of lifting ourselves up and away, and of connectedness. So now I'm going to play the video for you.
Andy, we can't see the video. We're seeing just the presentation screen. So maybe if you can stop share and reshare the video so that we can see it.
Okay.
Thank
Stop
you.
share. Sorry. Okay. I figured I would do that wrong. Okay. Now, you'll let me know if this works. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're seeing.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Oi. Sorry. So that's the video that we did. And I just want to go back to this. Hopefully you can see this. Yes, everybody can see this?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So the last thing that we needed to do was photograph the book. because I finally had here in Jerusalem all the pages and the boxes and the colophon and the title page. So I actually did a really bad job because Lynn and Mirta were not happy with the dark background. So we are currently reshooting this in Argentina, where it's probably going to cost half of what it costs here. But this gives you a sense of the final book and how it looks when a collector buys it, and how it looks when it's all put back together in the box. And our goal, of course, is to get this in the hands of private and public collections, because we did an edition of 15 and we would really love to share it. So I would like to end really with Emily's beautiful essay that she wrote. This is the very last paragraph, and this comes with the book. It's part of the book. She wrote this: during the pandemic, when many people were deprived of physical contact, ideas of the book as an intimate and haptic object resonated in new ways. In folio 3, Arnovitz has transformed an image of a photograph of two women performing rhythmic exercises found in a pre-World War II German encyclopedia entry on body culture into a poignant expression of reaching out and longing for human touch. In this reimagining, the empty space between the two figures is filled by a small book collaged onto the page, establishing a visual and physical connection. The figures meet by touching the same book, a tactile object. This physicality of a book connects everyone who has handled it in the process of its making. The folios that comprise the houses in the book have been touched by the artists and by the many artisans working in the printing studios. So now, dear reader, as you hold these pages in your hands and play a part in constructing this book's meaning, you are joining the conversation. And we actually have an Instagram account that we have lots of pictures of the book and the process that you can, if you're interested, you can subscribe to. So that is the end. And I think now, if anybody wants to ask any questions, so thank you all.
So thank you very much, Andi, for taking us. It felt also like a trip in Jerusalem, which is wonderful. Even I from Tel Aviv haven't had the chance to get there for a while. And I wanted to ask you first, I'm not sure everyone is familiar with the Jerusalem Biannual. So if you could say a few words about the Jerusalem Biannual, because it's a very unique art event in Israel. So a little bit maybe about it, how it's received.
So I think the first Biennale was in 2013. It might have been in 2011.
No,
and
2013.
It was founded by Rami Ozeri, who is a young, very committed entrepreneur, arts person who attended Bezalel for a short period of time. But his experience there was that there's a tendency in the art world to look down on artwork of Judaic content. And he really wanted to turn that whole thing on its head. And he felt like art with Jewish content deserved its own platform. And he created the Jerusalem Biennale. Now, originally it was called the Jerusalem Biennale of Jewish Art. Over time, I think, in terms of marketing, it's just become the Jerusalem Biennale. But every 2 years, there's an invitation, and it is not just Jerusalem artists. I mean, it is artists from all over the world, from LA, from South America, from France. Sorry. And it's really gained in its popularity. So that's the Biennale.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, and I think beautiful to see how in Israel, because the scene is quite small, when one person decides to make a move, the ripples are very much felt through the country, and the biennial has acclaimed or found its place within the art scene. I also wanted to ask you, in terms of collaborating on a book, I mean, as artists, we usually work alone in a studio. A book is even more of an individual kind of process. where like the need to collaborate, can you, or the feeling of collaboration as an artist, can you
So
say?
we were all really worried because all of us work alone. Sorry, my voice is going. I've collaborated once before with Yehuda Miklov, but he really did the binding and I really did the art. This is the first time that I collaborated with two other artists. And I have to say, I think it's a universal feeling between all four of us, but especially the three artists, that this is one of the only times I can remember where there was absolutely no competition, where there was just this intense, and maybe it was COVID, you know, maybe that was part of it, but this intense desire to work together, to do something as a team, something meaningful. And we were really open to sharing ideas and sharing sources. And it was such a positive experience for all of us. I'm not sure that it would work with other artists. It just happened to be the right time and the right artist.
So as I'm asking a few more questions, there was previously someone asked if you could write in the names of the artists you collaborated with.
Sure.
So we have the names. I'll obviously also be sending that, but if you can just pop that in the chat. And I also wanted to ask if you can say a little bit more about the video. I think we experienced it with a bit of a choppy sound, which was slightly maybe difficult to decipher because we were missing that part. But if you could say a few words about the video, the choice to have a video accompany a book and how you view it.
So Lynn and I had never done videos, and we were very skeptical and also very naive about the process. Mirta really held our hand through this whole thing. But we realized as we looked at our pages that it had the potential to have movement and to tell a story in terms of video. And Mariana was incredibly generous. Like she really stepped back. She didn't want her imprint of her own, because she's also an artist, you know, that's what she does. She really was very willing to take our images and our archive and our lexicon and build on that. And I would say from the time we saw the very first test, we knew that the book would transform itself into a video with no problem. So it was, but I mean, we worked on it for a good 6 months, and we were using stock music. And when we looked at one of the final versions with the stock music, we said, this is ridiculous. Like it needs to have music composed for it. And of course, in Buenos Aires, it was like $600 to have music composed for it. Everything was so cheap. So it enabled us to do things on a much bigger scale than we normally would.
So I'm seeing here a question. Did all the artists experience the quarantine as an isolation? So I'm assuming you can't speak for all artists, but maybe give us even a little bit of the vibe of Jerusalem artists and what it felt like in terms of the art world, just to give us a taste of that.
Well, I know Mirta in Argentina was under total lockdown. I mean, I know she couldn't see her mother. Like she experienced something very similar to what we did it was around like Pesach, April of 2020, where we weren't allowed to go 50 meters outside of our homes. I know that Lynn also, I don't know, you know, America didn't quite have the same stringent lockdowns that Israel and Argentina had. But I mean, all of us are basically the same age. You know, we're all in our 60s. So we were all being really careful. All of us had grandchildren that we were debating whether or not we should interact with them. So I think that we all experienced, I'm so sorry. We experienced it the same.
And I see here, Bobby is asking, how was it for the artists that were unable to join in the installation? So Mirta and Lynn actually never saw the exhibition up, right? Were they able to see responses?
It was awful. I mean, we had one artist Zoom. We had an artist talk that they were supposed to be at. And I had my iPad there and we Zoomed them in. So it was, a substitute, a poor substitute, but they never got to see the show. They've never seen the book altogether. It's been really sad because we really had plans to all be together. But I think that we've had multiple interviews on Spanish radio. We've gotten some really good PR. I think everybody's very satisfied. We'd now like to place the book in some collections, obviously.
Mhm.
But it was really sad to do this huge thing for 2 years and then to not be able to come together and experience it.
And I'm wondering if you could say a few words. I mean, having art or in a book, as a book, rather than a painting or a sculpture, is a very specific form. We're also in Jerusalem having, as you and I spoke before, the Imprint Festival, which is a festival for artist books that is happening in Jerusalem. So can you say maybe a few words of your love for this art form, which is quite a unique one?
So there's no other word but love, because you don't make money from artist books in general. I mean, you do it because you're in love with books and you're in love with the book form. I also happen to love poetry. And so a lot of my artist books are about poems. There's just something very intimate about holding a book. There's a big difference between a room full of people looking at a painting and an individual sitting quietly opening a book by themselves and experiencing it. And I think they're both valid artistic experiences, but there's something really human and tactile about the interaction of a person experiencing an artist book. And I love that. And I think that Mirta and Lynn also feel the same way. That's why we all make books. Because the other thing that's happening now is that the audience for artist books is aging. I mean, my children don't have the same relationship with books that I have. It's a bit of a problem. Today, most of us, our audience is not private collectors, but libraries, university libraries and the Library of Congress and, museum collections, prints and drawings, that kind of thing. And yet we still make them. But I will say this, I make much smaller editions now. I used to make 12 of something, now I make 6 because they just sit there.
So I see Rita just asked a question, and it's a beautiful one for us to end with. She says, I know you have worked in so many different media. What's next for you?
Rita is part of the Anolic Foundation. So thank you. What's next? So actually, what's next for me is I just finished today an artist book that I will run and get, just to give you a little tease. So in Jerusalem, we have these sort of neighborhood book deposits where most of them are in old bus stops, where people can bring books they don't want anymore, and people can take books that look interesting for them. So it's mostly paperbacks. And even though they tell you not to bring encyclopedias, it's very often like Encyclopedia Judaica, which they don't want. So last year, I walk by this place all the time to do errands. There were 2 photo albums that someone had stuck there from the 60s. And I took these home and I started to go through them and I was amazed. These were like classic Israeli pictures. I couldn't believe that someone would get rid of them.
So I've just done a new book called My Counterfeit Israeli Family. And I've taken these pictures and I've drawn images around them and I've created stories. This is all fiction about who's in these pictures and what the story is. It's completely made up. But this is actually something that I just finished today. And then I'm also working with the American Colony Archive. There's the American Colony Hotel here has the largest archive of photographs of the Middle East in the world. And they actually ran an orphanage for little girls between 1918 and 1924. Nobody knows why it closed. Nobody knows what happened to the little girls. Nobody knows where the building is anymore. So I'm working with that. I'm doing a big project.
Wow. Andy, thank you. I'm curious to see where these new projects will go. And it's lovely to see that Invented Family album. So thank you very much for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you all. I'm sorry I'm coughing.
It's okay. We'll be sending also for everyone all the links so that you can view Andy's books and works and all the look more into some of the information that came up. And just before we end, I want to share with you that the CSP Israel trip is coming up. The art venture that Ari and I are spending time planning, where we'll be basically, I think you might have felt now with Andy how you got a kind of insight into Jerusalem and some of the vibe through just the presentation and conversation with her. So imagine 9 days of experiencing Israel fully through arts, meeting many of the people you met here online, but actually seeing them in their element and space, and seeing Israel in a way that is, I think, very unique and beautiful. And we'll be launching this in the coming few days. So, Andy, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And good luck in the Infant
Thanks, Sherelle.
Festival coming up.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Have a good day or good afternoon or good night, wherever you are.
Bye. Thank you.